Okay, so I'm here in SBG Tullamore with Kieran Davern. Kieran Davern's head coach. You've been here for a while. You're also the ADCC for Ireland, representative in Ireland. So just explain how you got from the beginning of your career to here and what happened in between. Like, how did you start in MMA?
Well, I suppose I have to probably go back to how I started in martial arts. It was like we moved to London. So parents brought us to London when I was about 1 year of age or something like that. No work in Ireland in the kind of or maybe a late 80s, early 90s whenever we moved over, and we were there for a few years, and then my dad put me into karate at 7, and then boxing maybe around 7 or 8 years of age. So we were doing, myself and my brother were doing karate and boxing and everything else. My dad came from martial arts, so I suppose he was just trying to encourage me and my brother to have an active lifestyle, and we're doing all sports at the time. But that was the start of the martial art experience, and then moved back to Ireland. Went away from kind of combat sports and martial arts in general. Played soccer at a decent level, and then all the other sports that went with. So any different sport really to get me out of the classroom. Teacher used to come in and was like, "Who wants to represent the school in the long jump?" I was like, hand was up. "Who wants to do cross country next weekend?" And the hand was up. And it was discus, javelin, anything, GA. I was just doing everything just to get out of class. You know what I mean? I love sports and that. But in my later teens then, found boxing again. I went back to about 16 years of age, went back to boxing. And then kind of late teens, early 20s, found kickboxing and MMA. And that was it. So it was always a life growing. That my house was very martial art and kind of training orientated. But Dad was big into martial arts and fought and that. And it was the same. I used to see him basically coming home from work, throwing his gym bag in his back, heading to the gym, and then after that he'd head over and he'd do kickboxing or boxing or whatever it was at the time, and then the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah. So when you first came back, you said you went away from it. Was because you went away from it for a while? Sorry, was it because there was not much of a selection of martial arts over here at the time?
Yeah.
And obviously in the UK you probably had them everywhere.
Yeah. So we lived in southeast London, which is a fairly dense kind of populated area. And London in general, you can get from A to B fairly quick on tubes and everything else. So if you wanted to do something, you could go do it. And I was lucky enough that the karate club in London was literally a stone throws away from my house. It was jump over a wall, and then it was into this community hall where they did karate and everything else. And then literally just down the road, maybe about a 5-minute walk, was the boxing club. So we were living in between that. So that's how that came about. And then when we moved back to Ireland and that, there wasn't really much around. There was a bit of boxing in a few towns, kind of scattered. And then obviously, both my parents working and we were in school, and it was hard for them to drop us into different places. But to be honest with you, when you're younger and that, you find different things. You're running around chasing women and. You know what I mean? Sneaking into the pubs, playing pool, and all that type. So I'm playing sports in general. We're always doing sports, but and then we're to be honest with you, we had any house that we ever lived in. Say my dad would have a shed, and the shed would the number one thing that be in a shed would be weights and some type of multi kind of bench or gym bench or something like that, and a boxing bag. And there was always gloves and that. So we're always kind of tipping away, nothing too serious or anything like that. We're always involved in it somehow. But when I went away from it, when we came home, I eventually went back to boxing and kickboxing and MMA and fell in love with jiu-jitsu and MMA.
Yeah. So when you first came across jiu-jitsu, because everyone says it's a sport that on the outside looking in, it looks so complicated, and it is so complicated. But they say once you actually get down onto the mats, everyone says they just fall in love with it. A lot of people do jiu-jitsu. And what was your first impression? What was your first experience of jiu-jitsu?
My first night walking into a hall, it was a Mockra hall. Do you know what a Mockra hall is?
No.
Mockra hall is basically when you're down the country, so outside from Dublin, small little towns. You know the way you have say farmers, and they live in little small, tiny little villages.
Yeah.
And a Mockra hall was set up, I think, anyway, this is one part of it anyway. One of the reasons was basically for farmers to kind of socialise and everything else.
Okay.
So they'd have dances and they'd have quizzes and they'd have, bits and pieces and that. And I think this is the way they got people interacting instead of just going to the local pub years ago in Ireland. And there's still a few Mockra halls that are kind of opened up, and just basically a small kind of community little hall. And I remember I was when I left school, I ended up serving my trade as a brickie and stonemason. And I remember I was working on a site. We were doing blocks on a school, and I was talking to the crane driver, and the crane driver was bang on. I got on well with him. He was just like delivering blocks to where we were, and we were just chatting. It was do you know the handheld kind of cranes? Like he wasn't up in it, and we were just chatting away. And he was like, and I was just talking about. I was following the UFC, and I used to watch like say Cage Rage, and I used to follow the UFC like say from fairly young age. Like I said, come home from school, and I was meant to be doing say my homework, but we had say Extreme Sports and Bravo and a few different channels. And I was watching like say the UFC, like the early days kind of UFC, and then watching the likes of Cage Rage and any other kind of like English kind of promotion that would have been on channels at that time. So I was like, I always looked at it and I was like, that was something that was like pulled towards, and there was nothing around, at the time. So I was talking to this crane driver and everything else, and he said, I was talking about MMA and talking about a fight scene and this type of stuff, and he said he has a friend in Portlaoise that said trained MMA, and I was like, can you get a number? And he said, yeah, and I texted him. The guy's name was John Ging. He was my first MMA and Jiu-Jitsu coach, and I texted him, and he said, yeah, call over tomorrow night or the next night or whatever. And I remember I borrowed my girlfriend's car. I think my car was like falling apart at the time or something like that, and I drove over. I came up to this Mockra hall that we were talking about, and I walked up to the door, and I could hear like heavy metal music, because this is old school, kind of like, you know what I mean? Everyone had the music to kind of pump them up back in the day, and I could hear heavy metal music, and I could hear lads like say sparring or hitting pads, like reeling out and making all the noises that you would hear, outside a Thai boxing gym or an MMA gym or wherever it might be. And this is like this hall was rough now. There was like there was no lights in the toilets and barely light in the main hall itself. And I put my hand on the door, and this is a true story, and I could hear the noise and everything else, and I was like, oh, fuck it, I'm not going in. I was like, because that kind of like doubt in your mind, I was like, I'll just go home. And then I was like, no. And I remember the words that came out my mouth was just like, oh, fuck it. And I pushed the handle down on the door, I walked through the door, and I met the people that were there, and that moment changed my life. That was that moment there, and it was like the hand was on the door, and I've often been in situations like that as a young lad where, you're not willing like to walk through the door. You're like, well, I've met a door, or met a block, or an obstacle in life, and I'm like, I'm not going to go through it. But that's a good example of actually, like, say, doing something you didn't want to do at the time, and then like coming out the other side of that door, and then it's just like, this completely changed my life. For loads of different reasons. Obviously the physical, the mental, the opportunities that come along with the people you meet and everything else. So many opportunities, and so many good reasons. It's a great lifestyle. It's a great way to live. So that's my first experience of like walking into an MMA gym. And I remember when I got onto the mats, and I was lifting weights and everything at the time, and I did a bit of martial arts and everything else, and I did a bit of grappling, and I like, it was real old school. So I was like boxing with a boxer, and the boxer bet the head off me. Bet the head off me. Smaller lad, part-time lad, had a few kids and everything else, but was doing MMA for a while, and so I don't think we were just doing straight boxing. It was like kickboxing or whatever. We bet me around the place, and then it was like, all right, lads, we're doing grappling rounds. So if we're going to take off the boxing gloves, put on MMA gloves or whatever. And so I didn't know what a position was or a name was for anything, and I just got like murdered, and I was just tapping, the whole time. And like, I do say this to the lads. There's one or two things that'll happen to you when you come into an MMA or jiu-jitsu gym. It's a little bit different now. You don't get most good gyms. You don't get thrown into the deep end straight away. Especially if you have no previous kind of like experience or whatever else. But there's one or two things that'll happen when you experience training with someone that's actually a trained fighter or a trained grappler or whatever it might be. You're either going to shy away from it, and you're going to make excuses, and you're going to say, you're going to like ignore it. Ignore it, or you're going to turn around and you're going to say, I need to know what that lad did to me, and I'm going to have to learn that. And that's what happened to me. I was like, those lads wrecked me. Absolutely wrecked me. And I was like, I need to learn that. That's a superpower, because I've never felt like that. And I was like helpless, helpless. I just had no answer for anything. You just tapped me at will. And in my head, like say, same as what everyone else does in the beginning, trying to use more strength, trying to use more aggression, more muscle. And it just kept getting me deeper into, like, say, submissions and bad positions and everything else. So that's kind of like my first experience. And then I went home, and my wife now, she's always been my partner. So I've only ever had one wife as well. Got married this year with a girlfriend and boyfriend at the time. It was like 15 plus years ago. And she was like, how'd you get on? I was like, I got battered, but I absolutely loved it. And then I went to work the next day, laying blocks, and I was telling all the boys, and I was like, I found this new thing, it's unbelievable, and blah, blah, blah. And that was the first experience I had with it. you know.
Did your friends think you were crazy when you were coming in saying you got the bollocks beat out of you?
Yeah, and they did for years. My friends for years. So I lived in a smaller town outside Tullamore. It's called Kilcormac. I grew up there. So we basically, when we moved home from London, and we came home from London, and say one of my uncles said to my mother, was like, there's a small house here in Kilcormac. Just while you come back to Ireland, it's a stepping stone. You know, you can move to wherever you want. We were going to move to Galway or Dublin or somewhere at the time, and this was meant to be a stepping stone, and we stayed there for like 17 years. You know what I mean? But so I lived out in that small little town. There's a few thousand people. I think it was like 4,000 or 5,000 people in the town. It's about 10-15 minutes away from here. And I kind of grew up half my childhood in London, and the other half out in a small kind of like village called Kilcormac outside Tullamore. And but sure, no, it was unheard of. It was just like, it was GA. And that was it, and I was the only one doing it. And everyone thought it was mental. And then my friends wouldn't let me like touch them. Because anytime I tried to touch them, I tried to strangle them. I'd be practicing, because they didn't have a clue. She didn't know what Kimura was or rear neck. I barely had a clue at the time. I was just trying to figure stuff out, you know, and I ended up just grappling with them so I can get a little bit of extra training and moving around and that. But yeah, they all thought, you know, not all of them, yeah, maybe all of them thought it was mental at the time or whatever else. But and then as you go along, I'm sure like people are asking you, like, it's like anything in life. It's like, you do see this with everything. People maybe in the beginning will ask you like, why are you doing that? You know, why are you doing that? And then when you get a bit more successful at it and you build it up, they're like, how did you do that?
Yeah.
You know, and that's why I do say to the lads, and that you're going to have like every reason to quit, and you know, going to have so many different obstacles and everything else. And you've probably heard this, like people look at obstacles as a bad thing. It's like, oh, there's an obstacle, I may stop. So it's like you meeting that first door that's closed on you.
Yeah.
Instead of finding a way to walk through that door, kick that door in. And like say the biggest thing, I read a book recently, and it's called like The Obstacle is the Way. Have you heard this book?
No.
And it's so true. Like I said, the obstacles that you meet on the path, like the obstacles are the way. Yeah. Like it's not instead of viewing it as a block on your path, like that obstacle is a part of the way. Yeah. And that's the way I kind of view it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, so that's kind of like my first kind of experience of it.
And then when you were going in, like obviously you were doing the jits and you were doing the MMA, like did you ever think you were going to compete? Like when you first went in, did you go in and compete? And then how did you feel when you did first compete?
Yeah, like I always wanted to come. I only, same reason why most people do it. It was like I was a pre kind of McGregor era, so like I ended up obviously going to SBG and training with McGregor, and that when he was kind of like on the way up and that type of stuff. So it wasn't so much that I wanted to be a fighter. I did when I got into it, but it was more that like I wanted to learn how to defend myself. Same as any young lad, do you know what I mean? I want to learn how to defend myself, because it's like that cliche, it's like someday someone's going to try to take something from you. You know what I mean? And you're going to have the tools and everything to protect yourself and your family and everything else. And that's the way I kind of viewed it. I was younger and everything at the time. I was like, no, I just want to be able to handle myself. And I just wanted to be able to pass the time. And like, you know, I think if you're not doing anything, then you just end up like saying the pub Friday, Saturday and Sunday. And I was laying blocks and bricks on a building site at the time, which is a good trade. But it's a tough trade in Ireland when you have the weather that we have and everything else. And you only get paid for the amount of blocks that you lay or whatever else, unless you have a union job or whatever. I know it's different, but it was just to protect myself, and it was to pass time, and it was to do something with my life and everything else. And then when I got into it, I was so addicted to it. Like I loved it. I was hooked straight away. And even my dad as well, I have to give him a shout out. Like say I used to lay blocks for him. He had a building company at the time, and when I found out about Kavanagh and SBG in Longmire Road at the time, my dad would let me leave, like say work an hour early, so I'd be laying blocks all day. I could be down the country, be down in Kilkenny. I remember we were working on Freshford in Kilkenny, and I'd bring my training gear and I'd be laying blocks all day, 200 or 300 blocks depending on what we were doing. You could be doing footings or regular house or whatever. And my dad would say, look, you can leave at 4 o'clock, whatever. He was very supportive in that. And he was like, and I was like, I'd leave from Kilkenny and I'd drive straight up to Dublin in the work clothes, or maybe throw on a tracksuit and head up. And I'd train. I'd do like say Thai boxing and jiu-jitsu or jiu-jitsu and MMA in Kavanagh's place. And I'd come home most nights at 12:30, and then I'd be up then in the morning at 6:30 or whatever it was to be on the site in Kilkenny or Thurles or wherever we were working at the time, 8 a.m. And I did that for years, you know. And then the story kind of changed a little bit, but I kept that consistency going. Just kept showing up every day. That was the thing I fell in love with. And then when the recession happened, that was in 2008, that was my ticket out of the building game. Yeah. Because I was like, I only did it to like one, you know, out of respect for my dad. Yeah. To do something, as in I only got my trade because my dad was like, look, just get your trade behind you, and then you can go do what you want, wherever else. And he was very supportive. And so I finished my trade. I got my papers and everything else. I eventually went on to college to do like say different things with say like fitness and gym instructor and massage and all this different type of stuff over the years. And all I knew is that I wanted to be involved in sport. But when I found MMA and I found jiu-jitsu, I fell in love with it and I was just hooked. And that was it. And that's how I wanted to spend my life. And that's what I do now every day. Every day of my life is just jiu-jitsu, MMA, and just getting the lads better and get myself better and everything else and trying to make the gym better. So that's it.
You mentioned obviously John and SBG. How did you first hear about John, and what made you then go to the gym? Because you said it was pre-McGregor.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people in the country and a lot of people that watch now would only kind of know MMA from McGregor. So obviously you fell in love before, but how did you hear about John? Like who was on the scene at the time? What intrigued you to go to SBG and travel that distance?
Yeah. So there was a couple of different reasons. Like say one was when I googled say MMA gyms Ireland. I could only find like 2 MMA gyms at the time. One was in Newry and the other one was in Dublin. And I lived in a place at the time called Kilcormac, which was an hour and 20 minutes away from Dublin. So that's the trek I was doing up and down every day when I eventually went to Kavanagh's place. And that was one reason, because I googled it. And then the other reason was, like say, my coach at the time, he was a blue belt under John Kavanagh. And then one of the first kind of MMA fighters that kind of inspired me when I was just starting out was a lad called Rob the Dog Quinn. Don't know if you ever heard of him. He's kind of like a local legend around the Midlands and that. But really nice lad. But when we were training in Portlaoise, he was from Portlaoise, and he used to fight out of John's place in Long Mile Road. And then my coach at the time used to train up there, and he'd get like some of the techniques and try. You know, he would get some techniques and he put together, and then we'd be drilling this and, you know, everything else and trying to learn what we could. There wasn't much on the internet or anything else at the time. You barely had like any like instructionals or anything like that. It's not like the way it is now with BJJ Fanatics, and just Instagram is like an instructional the whole time. So your man Rob the Dog Quinn, I remember seeing like a little video of him on like kind of like a fairly like bad quality phone or laptop or whatever it was at the time. It wasn't great footage anyway. But he ended up beating 2 lads in the one night, and he won a title, he won a belt. And I just thought it was unbelievable. And then like he came into the gym, you know, we didn't even have a gym at the time. We were like, boys were like renting out like space in a hall, and we went from hall, we got kicked out of this hall because like we'd end up like going through the plasterboard. Do you know what I mean? Like there was no padded walls the way it is now.
Yeah.
And it was like taking judo mats down, put them down, clean them, and then we put them back up after every session. And I'm sure loads of people have stories like that. Nearly like the way you'd see old karate halls, the way they have the timber floor and if they had mats to put mats down and so on. And I seen Rob Quinn doing his thing, and I was like, oh, this is unreal. And then when I looked into SBG, I was obviously watching Cage Rage and all that, and Aisling Daly was fighting. She had the pink hair at the time, and Kavanagh was coaching her, and he had the long hair with the lip piercing and that type of stuff. And Kavanagh actually cornered against me one time. I had a match, a jiu-jitsu match early on as a white belt against Kieran McGeeney. You know Kieran McGeeney? Yeah, he's a well-known GA footballer and manager. Really nice lad. He just got his black belt, like say, a week or two ago off of John. But me and him had a match, 2 white belts, so 2 Mongos, 2 head squeezers. And John was in the corner, obviously corner against me because I was from Portlaoise, and McGeeney was training in Dublin in John's place, and we grappled to a draw. You know, I don't know if that's what it ended up being. It was a draw, and so I would have known John like on the scene, and I would have known that he was a black belt, and he was the only black belt, or just got his black belt at the time, or maybe he was a brown belt. I don't know what belt he was at the time. And when I started looking into SBG and that, and the way it was taught, and the whole, like say, they have like different concepts about like aliveness and the eye method and just different things, and about, you know, different concepts and ideas that I really liked, and the way it was being taught, and I fell in love with that, and I was like, right, you know, this is the right kind of fit for me. And then I just decided to make the move full time. I told my coach in Portlaoise that I was going to Dublin, and I went about with arseways. Do you know what I mean? Fucking told a friend to tell him type thing, and then he rang me. And it's only a young lad, I didn't have a clue. Do you know what I mean? But I trekked up and down to Dublin like 5 days a week up to John's place, say in the mornings, and then sometimes I go back at night time. You know, I just fell in love with it. I was addicted to it, and and that was it. Then it just kind of built from there. Just, you know, in the beginning I wasn't that good, and then just took me beatings and everything else that comes along with it, and I just kept showing up. Do you know what I mean? And then I'm still here today. I'm still competing, still training, and still trying to get better. And I'm in love with the sport more than I've ever like loved it. You know, like just my whole day outside of the gym is getting myself better, getting the lads better, getting the gym better, and just getting more knowledge in all different areas. That's all I do. You know, like I work really hard at being the best coach and the best martial artist and the best, you know, competitor I can do can be when I compete, and I put a lot of hours into it. And I'm like, if there's any coach out there just doing more hours than me, I want to know how they're doing it. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way, because I could honestly watch, and this isn't just because we're on camera, I could honestly watch 10, 11 hours of martial arts like on a Saturday. Do you know what I mean? During the week, hours during the week. Like my day is wake up in the morning, train, coach, study. Train, coach, study. That's it. That's my life. And then family and that in between. You know what I mean? So my thing is, like, if there's a coach out there and he's doing more, I'm like, right, I'd love to know how you're doing it. I'd take inspiration from it. You know what I mean? Because I know that I'm putting in the work. You know, same as the way the lads here are putting in the work, the fighters and the grapplers and everything else. Like they give 100%, so I give them 100%. And that's the culture in the gym. You know, so.
Yeah, no, and obviously the work you can see shown with obviously yourself, you're probably one of the most renowned grapplers within the country. Then you've got the 3 lads going to the Euros. I want to talk to you, like, from like the early days to now, from when you started to now, how advanced has technique got, rule sets? Just talk through some of the major differences and what the improvements have been in the sport.
Technique, like, huge. Like, say, like, to be honest with you, with grappling, we'll just use MMA grappling and regular grappling for an example, and you can do the same for striking and everything else. Like, the amount it's evolved, if you're not evolving, this is my opinion on it, if you're not evolving and you're still like doing the same techniques, and there is some techniques that stand the test of time, and the techniques themselves are solid, but there's different entries and setups and grips and different ways of dealing with different problems. But if you're not innovating, and if you're still, I think, like, if you're still teaching the stuff that you've taught 5 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, whatever it might be, I don't want to put an exact number on it, you're going to be left behind. You have to stay in touch with the sport. It's like anything. You have to constantly, like, say, you know, learn new kind of different ideas, and, you know, take inspiration from different fights, different cultures, different countries, and, you know, and that's just the way I go about it. I'm sure everyone has their own way going about it. But even the jiu-jitsu game, for example, like, if you're even the leg lock game in jiu-jitsu, say, from, like, I kind of made, I got some good wins over the years and got to some good, you know, some good platforms and stages to compete, like, over the years through, like, a certain type of leg lock game. And even that leg lock game now is starting to, like, be outdated. At least the positions are great and the finishes are all good and that, but because the counters and the defense and the escapes and everything are evolving with the offense.
Yeah.
If you don't evolve, you're going to be left behind. You know, so say, I'll give you a quick example. Like, say, there's a position called the saddle position. It's a leg lock position. And a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, say, for example, you could put someone into that position. It was a done deal. It was like you had a heel hook, and it was just all I had to do was put this person into that position. It's done. Like 99% of the time, it was done. Now, with the saddle position, say, the escapes have improved, and not only have the escapes have improved, the counters have improved. So, say, for example, people for a while were just escaping it, and then they were good. And then now what they're doing is, like, you go into a leg lock entry, they'd start to escape, but what they do is they'd counter with a back take. So it's like nearly dangerous using a technique that was like nearly like 100%. You get them in, they're done. You know what I mean? But now it's like, it's one of these things where, I have to change grips on it, I have to change position on it to shut that thing down that they might follow up on. So it's the same with MMA fence grappling, you know, grappling on the ground for MMA and everything else. Like the moves, like a double leg is still a double leg, and a single leg is still a single leg. There can be slight little adjustments on positions, grips, and everything else, but the entries and the setups and different ways of looking at it, I think you have to evolve. And in 4 or 5 years' time, you're just going to have to keep evolving with it. Otherwise, you're going to be left behind. You see it in all walks of life, not just martial arts. It's like, you know, do you ever meet the old lad and he's just like stuck in his ways?
Yeah.
It's like that. I don't want to be the martial art coach. It's stuck in my ways. It's like, this worked for us 15 years ago and we're doing it now and that's it. You know, and I'm sure there is some merit to that. You know, there is some bread and butter techniques that are like, this. Like, I was teaching a technique this morning and I was saying to the lads that, like, this is a move that I learned as a white belt, and it's one of these moves that has stayed with me the whole way up to black belt.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's a great little move. It's very simple and everything else. You know what I mean? But the game, I think that the game evolves really fast. Yeah. You know, and I think if you don't evolve with it, you're going to have a tougher time. You see it in UFC every weekend. These young lads coming through. It's not just the youth and that. Like, say, it's the way they're learning MMA and the way it's blended together. And, you know, you've great kickers and punchers and wrestlers and lads like jiu-jitsu thrown in top of the wrestling as well. They can submit people off their back. They can submit people on top, and everything else. So yeah, it's unreal. It's unreal. And then one of the biggest things is like access to information. So going back to what I was saying, like say when we started out, you could like if you got a DVD, you were a god. Like I remember I found a DVD on like Darce chokes and anaconda chokes, and one of my friends lent it to me. Yeah, no, this is back then, right? And I was like, one of my friends gave it to me, and he was like, "Have you got that DVD?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll try find it." And I just kept pushing him off, and then he just kind of left me alone for a while, and I just like studied this DVD. And then, like, say, when I was starting out, like, say, my go-to move, I used to hit, like, the whole time in competitions, was a Darce choke.
Yeah.
Someone shoot on me, it's sprawl, Darce choke. Now, very basic, like, say, back, or very basic now. The setups have to be a little bit different. Everyone's more aware of it. They've been exposed to it and that. But, like, it was like, that was, like, if I had found the DVD on leg locks, I probably would have been, like, good at leg locks at the time, or back takes or whatever. But that was the DVD that someone gave me. That's all the information I had outside of my coaches and the training room, and I ran with it. And that was it, yeah.
Yeah, so in result, like, because you've talked about how the techniques change, how have the likes of the health and safety, the shows, and the level of the amateurs changed as well?
Oh, huge. Yeah, like say health and safety number one. Like when we were doing MMA in the beginning, it was like it used to be. It was madness. It was like there was A class, B class, C class. And like when I say madness, it's no reflection on like any of the top lads at the time. It's just the way it was. It was the Wild West, and no, everyone was trying to figure it out. And there was lads that were there was lads that were there way before me, or a few years before me, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, Kavanagh and Andy Ryan, and Tim Murphy, and all the other lads that did it before him, lads up in the north, Rodney Moore, and all these different lads. So like they could only work with what they had, at the time and that. But like we used to get like say. Coach come in and then he'd be like, "Oh, you want to fight this weekend?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, what is it?" Or next weekend, and he was like, "Oh, it's A class, so that's like a pro fight." And then 3 weeks later, he'd be like, "Oh, you want to fight C class?" C class was like amateur rules basically today, but there was two versions of C class. There was one you could do headshots on the ground, the other one you couldn't. So like, "Oh, you have a C class fight this weekend or next weekend or 3 weeks time," and you're like, "Is it headshots on the ground or not?" And they're like, "Oh, no headshots." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah." And then it was like, so A class is your pro rules the way it is today. B class was pro rules minus elbows, 4-minute rounds. So that's what that was B class. And then so you had 5-minute rounds for A, 4 for B, 3 for C, and the gloves were bigger for C. Some C had headshots, some didn't have headshots. So you just be fighting every week when you should really have been fighting in the likes of the MMA leagues.
Yeah.
And the MMA leagues were only kind of just starting out, I remember my first fight, like first MMA fight, was in front of like say 2,500, 3,500 people.
Wow.
Live on fucking Satanta Sports, do you know what I mean? Against a former kickboxing world champion. So that was the kind of thing in the beginning, you know what I mean? Went the decision, but it was a desperate fight. Like, it was like terrible technique and everything else. But like, but to be honest with you, I feel that the lads of my generation and before me, you know what I mean? We had to walk certain paths for the young lads to come down or to walk those paths eventually, because I'm not saying we, but people before, the older generation, before the younger generation, obviously pave out different paths and everything else, and so that's and hopefully young lads can do better for the generation following them. Health and safety, even just if you look at the gym here, even like say every single wall is padded, like top high level, mats, like you can't ask for better mats. Just even the way the place is clean, just talking about gyms, like the awareness of like staph infection and all this different stuff, and the way gyms are clean, they're looked after, and just hygiene and everything else, and then like even if you talk about like say shows and that, like say the knowledge that referees have, the experience and judges, and just like even the cages back then were like literally someone just fabricated something like in their shed and just threw like a couple of pillows down in the corner and tied them with cable ties, make sure he doesn't bang his head on that. There's loads of lads that'll tell you, even lads that were older than me and that, and even my own experience, you go to shows and then they'd be like, there was a show I remember we went to before, and like it was the chandelier was like in the middle of the cage, so if you're like over 6 foot tall, you're hitting the chandelier. Wow. Stuff like this, mad stuff, like no slams because there's a chandelier there. Do you know what I mean? So it was the Wild West, but I think it's like anything. It's like act now, perfect later.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you're waiting, so say if there was someone trying to set up MMA in the country at the time, they're like, this has to be perfect, you'd never get anything done.
No.
So I think people had to do what they had to do and make sacrifices, whether it was through their own career or or financially or whatever it might be. I think people have to it was just the way it was. And maybe at the time people didn't even know it was going to grow into what it was.
Yeah.
We didn't. Like, I didn't. I didn't think it was going to be possible to get, you know, for Irish lads to get to the UFC or anything like that. Do you know what I mean? And then eventually, like, people start having success on the national scene with, you know, either the fights were getting better, but you'd see like American ex-UFC vets be brought in, and they'd fight, like, say, a top up-and-comer, like, say, pro, and then the Irish pro would beat him. And I'm like, oh, that lad was in the UFC, had 2 fights in the UFC, and he just beat him. You know, and then you seen that happening, and then it was like, say, a couple of lads then would go away and fight an international fight against, I don't know, say, a French guy or you know, whoever it might be. Yeah. And then they'd beat him, and then it was like, oh, we can hang with, you know, Europe and, you know, everywhere else, America and this type of stuff. And then I honestly believe now where we're at, like, say, with the gap with the grappling and the you know, wrestling, MMA, grappling, whatever you want to call it, I think, like, that's gone now. Like, and my lads are going to prove that at the IMAFs in a couple of weeks' time when you see the level of what they're going to do. Like, it's a different level. You know, and I put them up against any country in the world. You know, you're going to see that in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, no, and I can't wait to see that. Out of your whole the career that you had, I just want you to pick 1 or 2 fights that really stand out to you, like your favourite finish and your favourite performance that you had throughout, if you have any that spring to mind.
I have a few different ones. I have 2 kind of good little stories on. One was, I remember, like, John ran a show. It was up Euro Fight Night. I fought a good lad. His name is Martin Begley. He was like cage contender champion and that, like, say, and he was a good lad, and he would have been one of the lads when I was coming up. He was experienced, you know, and then our paths eventually crossed when I got a little bit older and spent more time at. And I remember it was round 1, and I think I went to take him down, or he took me down or something, but I can't remember. I was in half guard bottom or something like that. And I remember he just, like, cracked me with 2 elbows, and, like, or maybe it was 3 elbows, but he cracked me, say, like, a few times with elbows, and I could just feel, like, swelling, and I was like, oh, fuck. I can't stay here for too long. I can't eat many of those. Yeah. So then I just, whatever it was that was in me, I was like, no, get up. And I just remember that was in my mind. I was like, get up and then get him. I was like, no, I can't stay there. And then I remember, like, say, from taking those elbows to, like, say, coming up, taking his back, and then getting the finish was a really nice moment. Another time was we were up in Derry and we were fighting. It was a C-class fight at the time, in the middle of the A's and the B's and all that. And I was fighting a hometown lad, a good, like, Thai boxer, and I remember I always preferred, like, say, the grappling and that, just by nature and that. And I remember that when I walked out, we were in the Millennium Forum in Derry. It was chaos. Yeah. It was one of the early chaoses when, like I said, like some McGregor and them were fighting on it, and Paddy and everyone else. And I remember that when I walked out, my music was like, they barely played me music, you know what I mean? But you could hear everyone coughing in the background and sneezing and everything else. And I was like, oh, maybe there's something wrong with the sound, you know what I mean? Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but yeah, I didn't get the reception I thought I would have got. Yeah. And there was a couple of lads from SBG there and that, and I got, like, you know, a bit of a clap and everything else. There were like 4 or 5 lads there and whatever. And so then next, it was like one of these places where, do you know the way you go to the old cinemas where you sit down in the seat, or even football stadiums, you sit down in the seat, and when you get up off the seat, it hits the back of the thing. So anyway, this lad came out, they called your man, he was a local town hero, and music was pumping. So they got bass bins out of I don't know where, do you know what I mean? And he got that much of a reception. Everyone stood up off their feet, and then when they stood up, I could remember hearing the clatters of the seats hitting the back of the seat. Do you know what I mean? And then I was like, all right, okay, they're trying to set me up, do you know what I mean? So long story short, I think it was like we had a bit of a scrap back and forward, and it was round 2. And if you remember the Millennium Forum, it's nearly like a cinema, as in, like, it goes up like that. You know, it's tiered seat in the hallway. It's a lovely venue, and it's like they had the cage in the middle. It was like a lovely looking venue, and I remember it was like round 2 or something like that, and he was a tough opponent. And I remember I threw up a triangle or something was on my back, and then I just remember him just picking me up, and it was like one of the only times I remember he picked me up that high. I remember looking out over the top of the cage and seeing the crowd. So it was like Rampage Jackson kind of slam. And I was like, this is going to go 1 or 2 ways. Either he's going to knock me out, or he's going tighter into the triangle. And sure, we're about to find out. Do you know what I mean? So he slammed me down tighter into the triangle, and that was good to get that one because it was in his hometown and everything. So there's loads of little stories like that, you know, over the years. And then fighting on cage contender, getting a couple of wins on that, and everything else as an amateur and stuff like that. But to be honest with you, I get more as much as they're great, they were great experiences, everything else, and they mold you into the person and the coach you are, good and bad. I get more of a thrill seeing the lads winning. You know, I love competing, saying grappling, and doing what I'm doing because I'm able to keep that going with the coaching to some level. But I'm a coach by nature, and I just love seeing people succeed. You know what I mean? And say with the lads, and I get like I get as much of a buzz as they do. Do you know what I mean? I love seeing, or as much of a buzz as I did, if not more, than when I was fighting. And I know people say that, but that's true. You know, that's how I feel. But yeah, a couple of good stories, you know, good and bad. You know, good and bad.
There's always going to be the good and the
There's
bad.
a few mad stories as well, sure. But you know, it shapes you into the person you are.
Yeah. So when you transitioned into a coach, did you take over this gym straight away? What way did it work? Like, because I know you're here 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
So was it always SPG Tullamore, or what was it previous?
No, so a little bit of a backstory. In 2008, the recession happened in Ireland, and I was laying blocks on the building site and so on, and we got let go. There was no work. Country was falling apart for building anyway, and a lot of other jobs. And I was like, grand. For me, I'm like, this. I can train full time now in Longmire Road.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And now we didn't. Me and Charlie Ward were going up. Philip Peter was going up at the time as well, and we'd share lifts and everything. Well, he was always going up anyway, but we'd share lifts and that because Philip lives in Port Arlington, and say I lived in Kilcormac at the time, so we were passing through that direction. But we'd be sharing lifts now and again, and I remember, like, say, the three of us like had no money, and then even more so with me and Charlie, as in, like, say, because I would have known him, I would have trained with him more in Portlaoise and that over the years. Charlie Ward. Well, we didn't have a penny. Like, we were like scraping the barrel to go up to Dublin and be like, can you drive today? Because I have no money, I have no tax and no NCT. It was always this. It was like fucking, we meet guards and we're like, oh jeez.
Yeah.
I remember getting pulled over. I was heading up to Dublin one day. I got pulled outside Mount Mellick, a place called Emo.
I know it, yeah.
You know it, yeah. Came down over this. There's a steep hill from Mount Mellick to Emo, and then just on it, there was a straight road, and the guard was there. And I was driving like a Nissan Almera at the time, bought for like £1,000 or something, lime green. Or lime green.
Colour.
Lovely colour, yeah. And it wasn't by choice, it's just all I could afford. I don't even think I could afford it. I think someone helped me out or something like that at the time. But I remember meeting a guard, and I had no NCT and I had barely any tax. And he was like, why have you no NCT and why have you no tax? And I was that sick of making excuses and everything. I was just like, I genuinely can't afford it. Do you know what I mean? And I was just like, I was at rock bottom.
Yeah.
You know, even that time, like, it was at rock bottom, no money, no anything, and just trying to pursue this thing that I loved, and not knowing if it'd work out and what way would it work out, and struggling a lot, no money, like looking under the couch trying to get 2 or 3 quid for a chicken fillet roll or a breakfast roll or something. And yeah, so then I remember I was travelling up and down to Dublin, and I was teaching classes in Athlone at the time before I opened this place. I was teaching. Paddy Hoolan was coming down from Dublin. He was teaching the jiu-jitsu class, and I was teaching the MMA class. Paddy was getting a few quid for obviously travelling. I lived down the road, and I wasn't getting much money. The deal was basically like the lads were all paying membership, but if there's any drop-ins, you could keep the money. So it was like £7 a night or something like that. Yeah. So most lads were on membership. So some nights I go in and get nothing. Some nights I get £7, some nights I get 14, 28 quid. A great night would be 30, 35 quid or something like that. And I used to break down, like, say, a lot of time coming home, because the car was running on fumes, you know, this type of stuff. And Mrs. like, come out, give me a fiver diesel or petrol, get me going and everything else. And long story short, I was at rock bottom, and the recession happened, and then someone said to me, look, you're at rock bottom. You know, I wasn't in a good place, headspace or anything like that. As you would be when you don't have money and you're not able to support yourself, and you're living in a small town, and it's just like, you know, people are doubting you and why are you doing that thing and everything else. And I was at rock bottom, and I was like, right, there's 1 or 2 things that are going to happen. I'm either staying at rock bottom and it's going to get worse, and I'm going to end up like, say, the way people end up that don't pursue their dreams and everything else, or I'm going to make this work. And someone just said to me, look, you're at rock bottom, you're good at coaching, why don't you give it a shot? Why don't you open up a gym in Tullamore? So I've told this story a few times, but I went down to I was on the dole at the time. I went back to the back to work scheme, and I said to this woman, I want to open up an MMA gym, jiu-jitsu gym, whatever, and she thought it was mad, you know what I mean? Like, I would go off and do this course and do this, and just trying to get rid of me, you know what I mean? I was only a young lad. I was 25 or 6 at the time when I opened up this gym. And long story short, I kept an eye on her, It was one of the first times in my life it was probably the second time after walking through that door I told you about. So that door is big, not for actually physically or just physically walking through it, but even just the analogy of, like, I've found me when I was younger, like, you'd start something up or you'd do something, and then the first bit of resistance you go, oh, it's not for me. Yeah. You know what I mean? I was like, I remember the opening of this gym was one of the biggest learning curves in my life. It was like, because I'd always get to a certain point, I'd feel pushback, and I was like, maybe it's for other people. You know, you could see other people are meant to be wealthy, or other people are meant to be happy, or other people from New York or London or wherever are meant to have these opportunities. Because you live in a small town, and then if you're listening to a lot of negative people, it's gonna like seep in. You know what I mean? And at the time, I wasn't very aware of, you know, positive thinking and mindfulness, and you know, how to think and what way to think, and just learning and everything else. And so I met her once. She kept saying no, and then I went in one day. It was like the final meeting, and I said to her, "Look, what's the crack?" It was only £1,000. That's what I was looking for. £1,000. Like £1,000 wouldn't buy you 4 of these mats now. You know what I mean, or 5 of these mats. That's the truth. You know what I mean? You wouldn't pay for the insurance for the year on £1,000. So there was a bit of space in a boxing club upstairs, and they were going to rent it out to me for like £300 a month or something like that. And I said it to her one. I was like, "Look, can you give me money? I want to buy mats." I said, and she said, "No, you're gonna have to do a course or whatever." And I said, "Look, I promise you, if you give me this, I'm going to make this the best gym I can. It's going to be one of the best gyms in the country, one of the best MMA and Jiu-Jitsu gyms in the country. And I promise you, I'm going to do something that hasn't been done around this like area in the Midlands or anything like that." Yeah. And I kind of, the story kind of went like that. And then I said to her, she said, "Look, I don't know what it is about you or whatever, but I believe in you, and I'm going to give you the £1,000 or £1,200, whatever it was." It wasn't much more than that. It was like £1,100 or £1,000 or something. And she gave me the money, and then I borrowed another £1,000 from the credit union. I opened up the gym on £2,000. That bought me like quarter of the mat space was here. And I had a friend that I started off with in Port John Ging, who lent me some jigsaw mats. That I had like green jigsaw mats, and I had these blue and yellow ones that were all kind of pieced together randomly. I had a boxing bag in the shed at home, and I had a few bits and pieces, and I found a box and painted it, made like a box jump out of it and everything else. And the rest is history. That was it. I taught my first class, and some of the lads that did that first class are still here today. They're brown belts and black belts and that, you know, under me and that. So I take a lot of pride in that, and then take a lot of pride in, you know, building something up in the area that we're in that was never here. You know. But to be honest with you, when I opened it up at the time, the reason why I opened it was only to train full time in Dublin. I was getting no money. That £20 or that £15 or £30 would get me maybe a tenner, like say, or £15 of petrol to drive up and down to John's. You know, like I was driving on fumes, and then maybe like say £10. And I remember this, and I've said this loads of time. I even said it in my wedding speech. I got married in January. It was like, it was on about my girlfriend, my wife now, who was there, and it was like she always supported me. And it was like, I'd have like 15, 20 quid, and I'd like buy eggs, beans, milk, and bread, and I put a tenner into the car, or I'd be able to pay for my trainer fee, like give him a tenner or whatever it was at the time, because there's only so many times you can't pay your trainer. And I had nothing, genuinely had nothing. I was at rock bottom, and and then it just built into what it is now. You know, over years, like I said, trying to improve every area. That's our biggest thing here. We try and improve every single area every day, and it's not just people say this, but they don't live by it. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like, we genuinely live by it. You know, it's constant improvement every day in all areas. You know, I mean, even the colour of the gym matters. You know, the vibe in the gym, the way you talk to people, the culture in the gym. You know, the techniques, the details, the way we are on fight night, the day before, the week, the build up, everything matters. You know, so we try and improve in every single area. You know, and that's what has the gym to where it is today.
Okay, so you've obviously got the boys going over to the Euros, and like this is what I want to ask you, because obviously you're huge on technique as well, but you seem to have a good relationship with the boys. Do you think it's essential for a coach to be a mentor? I don't want to say father figure, but like someone that they can come to, like, because you've seen the ups, downs, highs, and lows. Like, are you just about technique, or are you there for them?
No, like I'm like, we're all in. Like, we're a unit. Like, we're a team, we're a squad. Like, if it's like if they're in trouble, I'm there with them. Like, say, if it's in the gym, out of the gym, whatever it might be, whatever it is, we're 100% like a unit. You know, not just the lads that you see, but we have a serious team coming through. You're going to see a couple of lads now make their debut over the next couple of months. I'm not going to make any announcements, but they're on shows and that coming up, and you're going to see, like, say, these lads coming through. But yeah, massive on technique, massive on, you know, mindset. We've Shane that works in the gym that does the nutrition and the S&C with them. So we try not to leave any stone unturned. But mentor, it's not. That's for me. It's not. I'm not looking to be a mentor or anything like that. Like, right, we know the relationship. I'm the coach. The boys are the fighters. Do you know what I mean? And the boys coach as well. They coach the younger generation coming through. So we're all helping each other. Like, say, right, okay, they might learn from me, but I learn as much from them as they do from me. Whether it's just talking about fights, or it's maybe they've seen a different grip or a position, and then we just innovate and we play. It could be like, it might be a book or a podcast, or it could be anything like. So it's a good relationship, as in, like say, we're good friends, we're a tight knit unit, and we would go to war for each other. Do you know what I mean? We would really go to war for each other. The biggest thing I think between a fighter and a coach, and if you lose it, it's bad. Like it's very hard to come back from it. Is trust. You know, we're big on communication here. It's like, say, for example, if you're training here on the fight team now, it's different for the classes when you've people are hobbyists and just want to get out and train and do their thing and do the best they can in jiu-jitsu or kickboxing or MMA or whatever it might be. But say the competition team, the fight team, whether it's the grappling team or the MMA team, we're very big on communication. So it's like, if you're training here and he hit you too hard, now there's a bit of friction or whatever, I'm just making up a thing or something like that, we need to fix that. And we don't let it fester. We nip it in the bud and we fix it now. Do you know what I mean? It's like if you've a problem with me, maybe I didn't say something to you, or I did say something to you and you didn't like it. Talk to me. Let's be adults. Let's be grown ups, and let's talk about it. Because I find that most relationships, like our friendships, fall apart because people isolate people or don't want to have the uncomfortable conversations. We'll have the uncomfortable conversations. It's like, right, Dave, you have a fight coming up next month in Belfast. You're not putting in the work. You know what it takes to fight on this team. I could literally put 15 or 20 lads in on shows, like say for the next few months. But for us, it's quality over quantity. There's loads of lads coming through, but they have to earn their keep. They have to do the stuff that we have laid out. We've a structure and a criteria that all the lads have to hit. And if they don't hit one of those out of like the 5 or 6 of them, they don't fight. They can keep doing novice, they can keep doing jiu-jitsu, they can keep doing, different things, but you're representing all them lads that are going to IMAFs, you're representing me as a coach, you're representing the team, you're representing yourself, you're representing your family, you're representing everything. And if you're going to do it out of SPG Tullamore, you're going to be 100% prepared. Win, lose or draw, doesn't matter, but you're going to be 100% prepared. Like these lads going to the IMAF, I'm telling you, it's a completely different level. So most of them, the last time they fought was, I think Ronan was the last to fight out a whole lot, and we fought in Premier FC against Carl McConway that's had like 24 fights. He was fighting before Ronan started training, So that's how much Ronan has closed the gap in the most respectful way possible towards Carl. He's a great fighter, great competitor, fights every week, tough as nails, great lad, and I'm sure he's going to have a great career. But you could see the difference with Ronan that's fighting at the time 9 months. He made his MMA debut 9 months, and some of his opponents were fighting like 5 or 6 years ago. That's when they made their debut. But I can promise you that you're going to see a huge difference at the IMAFs with these all around, not just grappling, everything, mixed, like well blended, put together mixed martial arts. The last person to fight was Ronan at Premier FC, and before that was Ronan and Jordan. Yeah, Ronan, I think, because Andrew had the pullouts.
Oh no, but cage conflict though. Or no,
oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, sorry, my fault. Yeah, we'd cage conflict, and then we had Premier, and then we had IUR with the boys on it. But say whichever one of those shows was the last event, we did an off season on purpose. So it was like there were shows contacting us, and they were saying like, can we get the lads fighting here and there now? And we're just like, look, not available. We're prepping for IMAFs. And what we did was, because they were so active, they were fighting every couple of weeks, and it was like camp. It was like, right, we're going to have a big, without giving away too much, we're going to have a block week where we can work on X, Y, and Z, and it's going to be a skill development stage. And then having the confidence and having the mindset and everything else, all of us, to turn around and go, we're not fighting. IMAFs is when we're fighting. You know what I mean? And after IMAFs, we'll get busy again. We'll start, because they're already booked for fights that aren't announced yet. On all your different shows that are announced around Ireland, all of them are booked, and there's new lads coming through that are on the same level as the lads. Obviously, the lads are experienced in that, but you're going to see some really exciting lads coming through. I can't wait for you to see the lads, and that's not me just saying it. It's just really exciting. The lads will tell you there's killers in here that are unheard of that are going to make their debut over the next few months. 6 months, 7 months, a year, whatever. There's lads are at different stages and that type of stuff. But yeah, I'm not just saying it. Look, the lads are as well prepared as they can be, and I would put their MMA game and their overall MMA game and their MMA grappling game against any country in the world. Any country. Obviously, like it's who gets their game going first and all on the day, but like you're going to see a different level in the IMAFs, and then you're going to see a huge different level with the lads when they go back on the Irish scene.
Yeah, because the IMAS obviously is where the best of the best you see.
The best of the best.
Maki has come out there. Loads of people have come out there. So, like, how proud of like when like obviously Andrew had won the nationals and stuff like that. And what do you think of the nationals as a tournament to actually pick it? Because it used to be picked on a different criteria.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way because you get potentially 3 fights before you even go away. Then.
Yeah, it's a great weekend. Andrew is a great story from that weekend. He fought Friday. He fought a guy from SPG HQ, Aidan Fagan, and he got. I think he finished him fairly early, round 1 or 2 or something like that. And then he had an absolute barn burner with Frank Matter. That's been training years. Tough lad. Colin Matter's brother. Really good lad. And Andrew got to show, number one, in the first fight, he got to show like his skill. In the second fight, he got to show like how much he wants it. You know, there's like a lot of people fall under that type of like pressure and that. And he stood toe to toe. You know what I mean? Obviously, for a coach, you don't want to see them do too much of that, but he showed like his toughness and how much he wants it, his heart and everything else. And in the Solomon fight, he fought Solomon. That's like, you know, very well. Solomon on the way up was the person that, like, say the lads here would look at and go, oh, he's one of the top lads on the amateur MMA scene, and he still is. He's way more experienced and everything else. And then to go into the finals and then to fight, you know, say like a person that you've seen that was on a really good level when you were starting out in your career, and then getting the win, you know, it was a great example of, like, say, showing his technique, his heart, and then just sticking to a game plan. You know, so he shows that he you know, he's the heart, he's the technique, he's the cardio. The cardio was huge in that fight, and then he was able to show that he's able to stick to a game plan. You know.
Yeah. No. I wish your lads the best of luck going forward to the IMAS. Obviously, we're all going to be watching. Owen, thank you very much for your time today, and best luck with everything in the future. And it was an absolute pleasure
Thanks
today
very
to meet
much.
you.
Cheers.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it, Sam Dave.